Hello and welcome to the Top of the World. If it's your first time, I'm Simon and we're in my shop. Upstairs, we've been working on a room that, for my regular viewers, you would know that I've redone the radiators and below the windows. What I didn't film, because I filmed it many times before, is the wallpapering of the walls between the windows and then the 3 coats of painting of the walls. So now I'm into trimming the windows. And again, for those regular viewers, you know that last winter I had a multi-planer here and I planed up all manner of different trims, enough to finish the upstairs of the building. And window architraving, I've done this quite elaborate mould, something I like a lot. And sometimes something as simple as a quite elaborate mould completely changes the feel of a room or a building from just the square standard architraving, or even the corners that are in modern houses. I rip them off, put something nice, but this of course is a much bigger building and I can really go to town. So I've already done 2 windows. I'm only going to go through the process. I'm only going to go through the process of doing 1 window and just explain for those that don't know. For those that do know, you can glaze over now, but for those that don't know, the process. Now I've moved my miter saw from its normal position so that I can be really accurate. And I have to be really accurate on both my 45 miters and my end stops, because I've lined the windows with the remainder of the oak flooring, on the basis that MDF is just out of our reach. And then if I had bought MDF, then I've got to paint it as well, the price of stuff. So I've used the remainder of the oak flooring to line the windows, and now I'm going to run the architrave round before I build the really elaborate pelmets we're going to do over the top there. And for those that you remember the pelmets that we built for the lounge area or the central area, these are going to be equally as elaborate, and in some cases more so, because we're building the pelmets to match the cooker hood I made. So back to the architraving. I pulled down all the moulds and each window is slightly different. So I've gone round all the windows and I've measured with a laser pointer, not a tape measure. There's always a problem when you're in a reveal and you have the bend of the tape measure and the accuracy is not, but if you've got a laser pointer, you're, in this case, millimetre perfect. So I've gone and done all the windows, and I've got my measurements for the uprights and I've got my measurements for the cross, and each one has got to be mitered. There's none of this running up to butt joint stuff, right? You're doing that if you're doing that for speed, and you're doing that if you can't miter. It's not the look, you know. Anyway, so I've got all my measurements and pretty much everyone is slightly different. And that's because I didn't build the reveals, and it's a wooden building and it moves slightly, and not all the angles are 45. There's 2 angles there. I've got one at 47 and one at 44. How are we going to do that? It's not easy to do an off-angle miter on 2 different sides without... We're going to have to mess with that. But anyway, basic principle, if we assume the 2 top corners are 45 and we can move the trims just slightly, we've got a little bit of play, but I want a perfect corner on those. So I've moved my miter saw, and my last cheap tape measure, well, that snapped. The end came off and it went. All right, for those that you may be familiar with this, this is a much older one I've had to dig out, and this is also split, broken. At some point in the very near future, there's a crack already, that's just gonna come off of there, and that's gonna, anyway, it's gonna work for us. So how to measure accurately in length when you're on a 45 and you're on a moulding strip? Most importantly is to make sure your miters always go the right way, because if you cut them the wrong way, then it's too short and it's no good. So I need my first strip on window 3 on the left hand side. It's got to be 1605. I'll show you how I do that. first thing I'll do is just check the mould. Now when you're running a lot through a moulder, sometimes the ends are a bit wobbly, so you need to check for that. And then you need to put a nice square on the end where there's no split. So I'm going to come in slightly because I've got a split up here and I don't like the end. So put your saw back to 90 degrees. And make sure you tie it up against the back fence and put your straight edge, your bottom edge. This is the edge that's going to sit on the window board. And then we've got a nice accurate end to measure off of. Now I'm going to do this in metric because I'm working in metric. So those of you that only work imperial, you can glaze over here now. Oh no, I can do imperial because I've got imperial on this tape. So I need 1,605 millimetres off of this edge. That's 1,000. Lock your tape off. Now I'm going to try and do two different things. Try not to mess this up. 1605. 1605. What's 1605 in real measurement? 63 1/4. 63 1/4 inches. So right on the top there, I'm going to make a tiny pencil mark. And this is where the inside of my mitre has got to be. I'll bring you in on this. 63 1/4 inches. I've got a tiny little mark there. Now this mark has to be transferred to the inside here, and our mitre will run this way. So I use a square. I put a square on the straight edge till it's on my pencil mark there, and then I transfer that pencil mark to the edge. And make it all where I want my inside cut to be. Now, if you're forgetful about which way your mitre's to go, right, you can at this point draw a line like that. This is an upright, it's going to meet the header. So the mitre's got to go that way. Bear with me. Don't glaze over yet. There's loads of you out there going, yeah, we know. Let me change to 45 in this direction. Because I'm not into wasting wood and I've got enough to do the job, right, it's always better to overcut and then slice again than to undercut. Right, so this line here has got to be inside where the blade's going to go. Now, if you're not completely confident, overcut. I'll show you what I mean. Can we see that? So that's an overcut. I've cut over so I can cut more accurately to the line. And there's the line. And our blade, this cut here, has to be here. We can see that cut hits exactly where that line is. So that means from this distance here to the end cut is exactly the height we need to meet the window architrave coming along the top. And then I'll mark this on the back side as to which window this is with pen. And the reason I use pen to mark up the numbers is if we paint the back, we're not painting the back, but if you was to paint the back, the pen impression would come through the paint, whereas the pencil would not. And we are painting these. So I'll repeat the process by putting the 90 on the bottom first. And then we do the same, we transfer the mark over. To where we want to cut. And we're on the opposite side. So our saw needs to be in the opposite direction. The 45 on the opposite angle. And then for the head, we turn our saw back. Now what I will show you is, because we've now got an angle on here, it's impossible to measure from this point here to where I make the second cut. So we reverse the procedure of taking this cut and marking it across, transferring where the cut is to a place where I can measure it accurately. Right, so I've got a line in up here, and that's basically transferred that across to this line, so that I don't have to try and get a tape measure stuck on there, because you won't do it, but I can measure from this point. Where's the header number 2, 1330? Set your tape measure out 4 or 5 inches past where you're going to mark it. Put your square back on this line that you've already marked here, which is transferring this angle across. Slide your tape measure up to your square. Now I know the end of that tape measure is exactly where that cut is by transferring it across. Now I can repeat the same process with the square, ready for the cut on the opposite angle. So without moving the tape measure, slide your square underneath. Find your mark, which is 51 3/4 inches or 1313. Make your mark. Transfer that mark down to your bottom corner. Like that. Now in a lot of modern saws, including this one, right, this has a laser which would be able to pick that up. Trouble is, right, they don't last very long. This laser is on and it won't, so this is how you do it without all that modern rubbish which don't last 5 minutes. Now I want the opposite cut to this on this end. So we turn that back to the opposite 45. And then we make our cut. So if all of that's been a bit confusing as to what I'm doing, allow me to show you. That's the head of the window. This is the right hand side. And this is the left hand side. Like so. And that's going to surround the window. But what's critical, what is absolutely critical, is not the outside. Right, I don't care about the outside. It's the inside. The inside has to be exactly the same size as your window liner. Can't be sticking out, can't be past it. If you're past it, you're going to have gaps here. If I've measured this wrong, then this is going to show the window liner. Or if I'm too long or too short, it's going to be inside the window liner. So it's the inside line that has to be perfect, and the outside is what the outside is. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, because this was all mass moulded and then racked, it needs a quick prep before painting. And those of you who've been around before, right, you'll know I'm really not into painting wood. However, I've got to achieve a certain look in this particular room. So we got to stain these, we got to paint these, and we got to paint these the same colour as matches the kitchen furniture to make it pop against the walls. So, do I want to go on about the old days? In the old days, what you have to do when you're cleaning up profile is you'd carve cork, and then you would wrap the sandpaper around the cork, and that would... Now we have what we call these profile blocks. Right, and you can buy these with different radiuses and different sizes, but they're very thin, very flexible, spongy. This allows me to clean up what I want. So on the sharp side, you will always have a little bit of very fine wood that's left from the moulding. And then in here, depending on which way the wood goes through the moulder, depends on whether it lifts the grain or not. And you will have a second chance at rubbing down the grain after you put the primer coat on, which makes the grain go stiff and you can rub it down again. If you rub down between each coat of paint, you can achieve the glass finish. So we'll just give these a quick clean up. Timber preparation to take paint or stain. I know way more than I should. From my commercial days, it was a really big thing. When you're producing a building that you're charging a customer 3, 4, 5, 6, 700,000 pounds for, it needs to be right, and it needs to be right every time, because your profit will disappear so fast. So somewhere in the 90s, we had to change from solvent-based paints to water-based paints. Without any question, the worst thing that ever happened to the industry. So Sikkens, a huge manufacturer, they were all over this like a bad rash. And they brought out the whole new range of paints that were water-based, not oil-based. So with an oil-based paint, right, it's wood. The oil is absorbed by the wood. It has an adhesion like no other. However, with the tree, it's kind of oil-based, it's sappy, it's oily. It rejects water. So now you've got to make a paint that the timber doesn't want to take. It really doesn't. You can't get the water to take the paint into the timber like the old oil-based. It sits on top. So, one of the biggest things I learnt from this is when you finish a piece of timber, and it goes through the sanding process and, you know, the preparation process, the grain gets blocked by fine dust. And this fine dust, of course, is not part of the integral makeup of the timber. It's going to come out. And therefore, if you don't get the dust out of the grain, your paint will peel off like wallpaper. It just will. And I don't care what wood you're putting it on, whether you're putting it on oak or mahogany or hickory or maple. If you don't get the dust out, the paint's coming off and it will peel off like wallpaper. And the rectification of that on site is immensely expensive. In addition to that, the disappointment by the customer. So once you've prepped it for paint, compressed air. It is the only way you will get the sawdust, the fine dust and the dirt out of the grain. Okay, now it's ready for priming. And that's one window done. I've got 5 to do. I'm going to do all of those. And that's the process behind getting your miters right by using your square and transferring your line from the back to the front to get your measurements accurate for the inside. None of this is going to be fully understood until it's painted and we go upstairs and start to fit them. And you'll see how, firstly, by painting them in the right way, in the right colour, and using the different kinds of timbers, we're going to make those windows pop. And these are all the windows, of course, that I spent last winter renovating. So I'll do the others, and then I'll bring you back in when we get to the next stage. So this is the primer coat. Arguably the most important coat. It's like a foundation. If you build a bad foundation, don't matter how nice the house on top is, it's going to fall down. So we'll call this a foundation coat, a primer coat. It's really important that you get this primer coat into all the holes, and especially when you're using mouldings. Would I spray a primer coat? Yeah, if I had enough I would spray it in there. But it's not worth setting up the gun, and of course we can't spray outside, which means I'm back to the overspray in here. So we'll paint it by hand. So that's the first coat on, and now it's all sanded back down. All of that is the first coat on, dried, 24 hours later, sand it back down until it's nice and smooth. Right, I can't emphasise enough, if you want a quality finish, it's preparation, preparation, preparation. As boring as that is, right, hard work, especially when you've got profiles like that. Right, you can't run it through a drum sand or a belt sand or a machine, you've got to do it by hand. So now I've sanded it all back down, it's ready for its second coat, but now it's sanded down, you've got to use the compressed air to get rid of all the dust again. Otherwise you'll just get a million pimples and possibly even the second layer peeling off from the first layer. So first coat, moulding, sanding, painting first coat, and the first coat lifts the grain. Right, it just lifts the grain, don't just lift it in patches, it lifts all the grain. So a quick sand down, try not to go back through the first coat, and then we're ready for the second coat. And you can see, you know, first coat's reasonably good. Have I gone through the paint there? Yes. Will it cover all right? Yes, I think so. Yeah. Right. Let's blast that lot off with air again, and then we'll go for a second coat. Quite the storm going on. Okay, second coat applied. Now I can tell you from what I can see, 3 coats ain't going to be enough. We're going to need 4 coats on this. Yeah. 4 coats on that. Right, now I've got freshly painted wood in the shop. I suppose I should start renovating that big lump of cast iron, really. Probably not. So all that work with my trims being millimetre perfect, we're going to go with millimetres for now. How did that work out? Well, I had to take half a saw blade's width off of 3 uprights to make it fit. So you see me laying the bottom timber, and I think you've seen the window board, but you've definitely seen the radiators renovated and fitted. What you didn't see was me lining the walls with lining paper, because you've all seen me wallpaper before, and that's had 3 coats of paint on it. The other thing I've mentioned but you haven't seen is the window linings themselves, which my original plan was to use all MDF for the window boards and this. Like, it's out of my price range. But what I did have was several packs of oak left over from the oak that was donated for my office floor. So we've got oak on here, and then we've got all the trims that are on with 4 coats and I put those on this morning. Well, I've been doing it for a number of hours now, using 30mm brads. The reason I use 30mm brads is because the pin gun that I've got fires the brads below the finished level of the timber, and therefore I can get a perfect fill and finish. You'll also notice my miters are about as perfect as you can want. Did I have to fill? Not really. You know, the last coat of paint in situ just on the face, not on the edges. That filled in any hairline cracks that were there. And this is the result now. This is all these trims. So I'll just show you where we are. And then the next stage, I've got lights to fit. And I've got all the various lights that my Sarah wants. And then we're into the trim around the top and the pelmets, of course. The pelmets are involved and a big job. And we're going to match the pelmets to the cooker hood for the entire room. So you can see the oak lining instead of the MDF. How did that work? Well, that's just the way it has to be. But this was really, really nasty before, and now it's all trimmed out with perfect liners. And yes, the scaffolding is still up outside. So if I didn't show you the window board, this is the window board, and I've carried it all the way around. So once we've trimmed that out, we'll get the lights up next, and then I can start measuring up for the pelmets. But it's Sunday today, and I've been working on this now for 6 hours, and the plan was to start on renovating the big cast iron wood burner that I got yesterday from the theatre. That's not going to happen because I don't want to work for the rest of the day, but I am finished with this video, and you have seen the results. All this trim, remember, of course, I cut from the forest, and I used the multi-head planer to plane it myself. So where am I on this room on cost so far? I already had the paint on the shelf, and I already had the varnish on the shelf, and I already had the stain on the shelf. So very little, very, very little, just because I keep everything. And I've managed to mould all this from scratch. So thank you all for joining me on this one, and we'll catch you on the next one. And don't forget, if you like the content, give it a thumbs up, helps the channel. If you're not subscribed, consider it, doesn't cost you anything, really helps me out. Bye for now.